time is upon us. We are incredibly fortunate today in that the guest we have. So Ari is someone I met at TEDx Kyoto in November last year, and I remember his was, I can't remember, the second to last or last presentation, and it was an incredibly powerful moment for me to see that. I was then fortunate to talk with him at the after party, and we talked a little bit about Doshisha and especially the junior high trip to Nagasaki, which related to what he was talking about. And he graciously, at that point, expressed an interest in coming down and being able to talk to you. So, for all of you here, this is an experience that unfortunately you may never have again. So please treasure it as much as you can. Ari is currently on a scholarship. He's working for National Geographic as a photojournalist, and he has published a book, which we have in front of the CC. Please, if you have the chance to read it, it's an excellent book describing his grandfather's experience and also the experience of the atomic bomb survivors that he has met. As an extension of that, he's now living in Fukushima and continuing the work in Japan, looking at the effects of different nuclear problems on Japan and the wider world. Okay, so Ari is now going to talk to you, and I hope all of you take away as much from this as I was able to. Okay, so I'll hand over to Ari. Thank
you. So, when I was 8 years old, can y'all hear me? Is everybody hear me? So when I was 8 years old, my mom took me to a party. And before we went inside, my mom warned me that the woman that we were going to visit, the woman who was coming to America to see us, was burned really badly, and I shouldn't mention her scars. And I said, Mom, why is she burned? And she said that she was a survivor from Hiroshima. And I said, Mom, don't you think that's weird that your friend and your father's friend is friends with a survivor from Hiroshima? And, you know, and Grandpa and my dad's dad dropped the atomic bomb on her. And I don't really remember her scars or anything like that, but I do remember her spirit, like, being warmly accepted by them. And after that, I was kind of obsessed with Japan. She was the first Japanese person I ever met. I was really obsessed with Japanese culture, and I grew up really wanting to do something in Japan. I always wanted to learn Japanese. I studied it in college. And when it came time to graduate, I wanted to write a book about my grandfather and the Japanese lady. I can't say her name publicly, but we call her family wants me to call her the Japanese lady. That's just the way it is. But I wanted to write a book about her and about him. And actually I got awarded a grant, not this National Geographic grant, but in 2011 I got a grant, and on March 10th, 2011, I found out I won. And that morning I was celebrating. I was going to Japan when I graduated college. I was going to live my dream. And then that night, for us, was already afternoon for you, and the tsunami hit. And it caused a nuclear meltdown in Fukushima. And people left Japan. People were afraid to be in Japan. Everyone's afraid of Japan. But this amazing coincidence, I have to go to Japan, and I'm not going to cancel my plans because of the tsunami or anything. And actually, I wanted to volunteer in the earthquake in Haiti in 2010, I think it was. And I never got to go. I never did anything about it. So I was like, well, you know what? If I'm going to be in Japan and I'm going to research, I'm just going to try and find a way to go volunteer in the tsunami relief. And that I can get to later, but the first day I was in Japan, I got to meet the Japanese lady's family, and I met this niece when I was 8 years old, and now she was a mom and she had kids, and she said, well, come and see us, we'll talk about this ambition you have to write this book, but come and meet us. So I said, okay. Well, when I met her, I asked her to work with me to write this book and to tell these stories, and I think if we can come together from opposite sides of the bomb and work together, then we can make a real message for peace. This is our chance. And she said, no, I'm not going to work with you. We don't talk about this. I am a mom. I don't have a mind for peace activity. I have children to raise. And of course, we will be your friends privately, but I can't work with you. If you want to understand Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you have to meet many, many, many survivors, as many as you can before it's too late, because they're dying, they're old. And so I started to meet survivors, and I met a graduate of Doshisha. His name's Shinpei Takeda. He's an artist. He was in Japan. He speaks fluent English, and Asahi Shimbun had done a story about what I was doing in 2011, and they said, okay, well, you need to meet Shinpei. He's a good person for your research. So, of course, we met, and he had this idea. He's like, I'm going to introduce you to the person that's going to change your life. I was like, okay. I think Asahi Shimbun already did that, but I'm going to introduce you to Yuji Sasaki. Yuji Sasaki is the nephew of Sadako Sasaki. Sadako is the girl who folded 1,000 paper cranes, who's the child monument that's holding a paper crane. And if you know about Sadako, she was the girl that, when she was 12 years old, she got leukemia from the bomb that she was exposed to as a child. And people fold paper cranes for peace because of her story. It's how I learned about the atomic bombs too. So I was like, yes, I can meet Sadako's family. Of course, I want to meet them. It's so exciting for me. They're a legend. And when I met Yuji, he caught, it's like an idea train. He caught an idea too, and he runs into the back room, and he comes out a few seconds later, and he opens a little plastic box. And in the plastic box was a little tiny paper crane, like literally this big, like the size of like the dot in your palm of your hand, and a little tiny triangle, paper triangle. And he said, this is the last paper crane that my aunt folded. And this triangle is the crane that she didn't finish. She died before she could finish that crane. And in 2010, we're donating the paper crane. We started donating these paper cranes around the world. The Hiroshima Museum is giving them back to us one by one when we find a new place to take it. And we went to the 9/11 memorial in New York City to donate one of the paper cranes because the woman in the Japan Society in New York connected Yuji's family to the 9/11 Family Association to donate one of the paper cranes there. And at the ceremony, they got to meet the grandson of President Truman, the president who dropped the atomic bomb, Clifton Daniel. And when he met Clifton, this is what Yuji's telling me. And when Yuji met Clifton, he did the same thing for him that he's about to do for me. He put the paper crane in my hand and asked me to work with them to send a message of peace. And I'm 23 years old. I'm still 27 now, and I still don't know what I can do for peace. And at the time, I was like, whoa, I'm not worthy. Like, I can't do this. But and he said, no, we can just get together and we'll talk, and I want to introduce you to survivors. And next summer, you can come with me and President Truman. We can all get together. Originally, his idea was to go to Washington D.C. for the 125th anniversary of the cherry blossom present from the Japanese emperor to America for the cherry blossom ceremony. But it evolved for us to come to Hiroshima's anniversary that next August. But the same night that I met Yuji, Shinpei was like, I got a few more people I want to introduce you to. Shinpei is just bent on changing my life. And he introduced me to some people who were volunteering in Ofanato, in Rikuzen Takata, in Iwate Prefecture after the tsunami. And I had the chance after that to go and volunteer. I finally got to do something in a disaster relief to really help. And I met, actually what I was doing was cleaning people's photographs. A lot of people lost their everything in the tsunami, but the most precious thing was their memories. And we were washing pictures, and the girl, my boss actually did a TED Talk too about, she's a photo retoucher in the fashion industry, and she got to use her powers of arguable evil to, making fashion beautiful and more people skinnier and all these things, but she got to use her powers to fix people's photographs digitally and give them back to people perfectly. And she connected 500 people around the world digitally retouching people's photographs. And we were also hand washing. And I got to wash thousands of photographs and give it back to people. And when I was washing these pictures, I was talking to the other volunteers, and one girl told me that we were just like, why are you in Japan? And I was like, well, I don't really tell everybody, but I'm here because of my grandfathers and all the research that I was doing. And she goes, wow, your grandfather saved my grandfather's life. And I was like, what? Yeah, well, my grandfather was already on the island. He was going to be in the first wave of the battle, the invasion that was supposed to happen on August 7th. Or maybe it was August 8th, but the bomb dropped and that wave of invasion was canceled and he survived. And he wasn't on a boat coming to Japan. He was already in Japan. And so she said that she doesn't know how many lives were spared by the dropping of the atomic bomb. And today, many people argue about how much life was spared by the bombs, but her life was. And she feels strange because she knows she's alive because so many people died. And another girl told me that her grandfather was part of the Nagasaki mission. And her grandfather they didn't know what he did. He wasn't on the main plane, but they had all these photographs, secret photographs no one had ever seen before. I have the pictures, I can show them to you after if you have time to look at them. But we eventually connected later on, and they're in the book too. We eventually connected later on, and she was able to send me the photographs of the Nagasaki mushroom cloud that no one had ever seen before. They weren't the best images, which is probably why the military didn't pick them to be seen, but it's another perspective of the bombs. And here I was in Ofanato, helping in the tsunami relief, and here these other people were talking about their connections to the atomic bomb, and I realized just how many people were connected. And one photograph I cleaned, I was looking at it, and there was all these old guys in Saipan, and there was a reunion. There were just old guys getting together from their Japanese military troop, getting together in Saipan X amount of years after the war, and I knew that my grandfather and his unit also had reunions. And I just had this strange moment of connection that we were just people, and that while we fought wars and we could blame each other for the wars, we were all just people. And so the next year I came back with President Truman's grandson and got to meet him for the first time, and we got to go all over Japan and meet so many different survivors. And they asked us to tell their stories, and to tell them to everybody. And then I realized that the book I should be writing wasn't just about my grandfather's friend and my other grandfather, but it became about all of these people that I got to meet, and these survivors. And oh my God, I mean, they told us like how terrible that they went through. I mean, they were just regular school kids. They were in high school or middle school or working in hospitals or volunteering, and everything became about the war. You know, in Tohoku, after the tsunami, everything was Ganbatte in Japan, Ganbatte Tohoku. It was still Ganbatte back then, but it was for a different kind of fight. So, which is amazing. I mean, the world was afraid of Japan at the time because of that spirit. But all these kids, on August 6th, it was a clear, beautiful day like today, except a lot hotter because it was August. You know what August is like in Japan, but everybody was outside working. And some people were in class, and some people were on their way on the streetcar. A lot of the people I talked to forgot something, or were late to something, or some reason they weren't where they were supposed to be. Because where they were supposed to be, they would have died. You know, some people saw the plane fly, and they saw it fly in a different direction, or a black thing drop, or they didn't see anything. They just got a pressure. Some people caught it. They didn't say it was the wind, but they felt pressure, and they blacked out. Everybody says they blacked out, and nobody knows how long that they were knocked out for. One girl I talked to, I called her girl. She's like 70. She's like 84 now. She was 13 at the time, and she was in the bunker under Hiroshima Castle. How many of you have been to Hiroshima? A few people. So there's Hiroshima Castle, which is really close to the hypocenter for the location the bomb was dropped, and there was a bunker there. It used to be the military headquarters. And these 13-year-old girls were operating the call center. When there was an air raid warning, Oka-san was in charge of calling to NHK saying release the air raid warning. And for some reason, they didn't get the warning that the planes were coming. Usually Shikoku or Okayama would be like, hey, there's planes coming from Shizuoka, just so you know, put an air raid warning out. But nobody saw or detected the Enola Gay. And this is from her story. And so it was too late, and they immediately got it at 8:13. They are hearing the reports, and she's waiting for the order to put the air raid warning out. And when the air raid warning out, they have to close their own shelter, they close their own windows and everything. And so finally she gets the order, they run to close the doors, and it was too late. And she was blown, even from the bomb shelter she was in, she was blown 6 meters in through the room. All the phone operator, everything was toppled on top of her. But she wasn't knocked out for too long, because when she woke up, she was able to go outside of the bomb shelter, see that nothing was on fire yet. She saw like a haze in the air, she said, and everything was just toppled and destroyed. And she said the soldier was injured, and he said, oh, a new type of bomb was dropped. Something new was dropped. So she goes in and she looks for all the phones. She tries to find a working phone, and she gets one, and she calls to Fukuyama. I think I'm saying that right, Fukuyama. And he says, Hiroshima's been destroyed, a new type of bomb was dropped. And it turns out that her calling was the initial report, the first report that Hiroshima had been destroyed. And then the city caught fire, and she was stuck in the shelter for days, and she had to, one other girl survived in there too. They were the only two who survived. And now she's still alive, she has leukemia, but she's still alive. And she took me back to the shelter, and she told me her story there. I had her photo on the thing too, so I can show that to you after. But before, I went to Nagasaki, and I got to meet the family of Tsutomu Yamaguchi. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was the double atomic bomb survivor. There was about 100 or so people believed to have been in both cities. Either they were passing through, they passed through both cities, or some were from Nagasaki, and when Hiroshima was destroyed, they escaped and went home to Nagasaki, and then of course survived Nagasaki as well. And Tsutomu Yamaguchi's daughter, he's no longer alive. He passed away in 2010. But when his daughter came to meet me, she says, you know, we could be here and just yell at you for all we want, because what your grandfather did. And he came back in 1985, and he didn't apologize for what he helped do. In fact, he said he didn't feel guilty at all. And that angered so many survivors, and it angered us too. But my father taught me how to be above that. We are not looking for an apology anymore. We have to come together. We have to talk to each other. And we have to send a message of peace together. We won't always be able to stand together on stage and talk, but you can go in the world and tell this story, and I can go in the world and talk about your grandfather and you coming to meet me, and we can contribute to peace. Tsutomu Yamaguchi always said that we're living in a world where we listen to the loudest and the most radical voices. And World War II is the exact same way. You listen to these, you hear these people and you think that they're right because they're the loudest ones and they're getting the most support. But you know in your heart what is right. And you know in your heart what is true. And the truth, he says, starts out as a whisper. But we have to keep telling it. Because the truth can transcend borders. So if you can imagine a world without war and a world without nuclear weapons, then we can all work together to achieve that. That was my TED Talk, basically.
Thank you.
That was like some of us, I see some volunteers from TEDx Kyoto who are here. They didn't get to see the talk. That was my spiel.
Okay, so you now have about 5 minutes to rush the front to the first person to talk to any person.
Or just stay where you are.
And stare at him until he feels uncomfortable.
The first 2 chapters of the book, I basically went over. So if you read
Should we get the book for you?
Sure, yeah. I have it. I wrote a book called I don't like promoting it, but I wrote a book called The Nuclear Family, and what I explained was why I was doing this, and that's the first chapter of the book. So I hope that you read it. Before I got to know him, but he was a big speaker. He talked a lot in public. He was always on the news because actually a lot of veterans, they didn't talk about their war experience because it was really traumatizing. They saw terrible, terrible things. But he was really against the idea of nuclear weapons. And he didn't say sorry or feel guilty about what he did, but he was really against the idea of nuclear weapons and spreading and using them again. And I think when he was talking was in 1985.
You did kind of actually feel sorry for David.
I'm sorry?
Maybe he did feel sorry for David. Then maybe he did feel sorry for David.
I don't think he felt sorry for what he did because he believed it ended the war, but I think he was more worried about future wars and the future activities that people can take part in. You want to come and talk privately? We can do that too. I think it's embarrassing to shout out in the room.
Okay, also know that there's 2 copies. We have now two copies of the book in the CC. Okay, and if you get really worried they've run out, I have 3 copies upstairs in my private collection if you wish to borrow them.
Will it be translated into Japanese?
The survivors who I spoke with were told that it would just be in English, so that's some of them are not comfortable having the testimony in Japanese. If you guys know or not, but atomic bomb survivors had a lot of discrimination because of their exposure to radiation, and they were worried that like they had grandchildren or their children would have trouble getting married because they came from this like radiated genes or something. And there's been no proof scientifically to show that there is a long-term generational effect of radiation. My grandfather also passed away because of radiation exposure, but I haven't had any problems. I'm by definition a third-generation hibakusha as well. Some survivors told me that before. I would never have called my grandfather hibakusha before, an atomic bomb survivor, or radiation-affected person. But by definition, he was. And so by definition, I'm a third-generation survivor, or radiation-affected person. But we don't have any effects in my family. I think everyone's different. I think I saw some of you from the third period class, but one survivor told me that her husband never admitted he had any concerns that she was hibakusha, but when her child was born, she saw him counting on the fingers and toes on the baby, and she realized that he was having private anxiety about if his children would have been affected by the bombs or not. And so even it's a hard thing to admit and a hard thing to confront, but there's fear and anxiety, and also now fear and anxiety in Fukushima because of the radiation crisis that's going on and the nuclear crisis that's going on in Fukushima. And there's no safe level of radiation, right? There's no such thing as a safe level of radiation. It will increase your likelihood of getting cancer, but by how much is the question. And it's about how much you're able personally to feel is safe or not safe. For example, if your family has cancer in your family, sometimes it's a genetic thing. People have a high likelihood of cancer. So say you have 50% chance of getting cancer. All right, no exposure to any radiation. But then you go to Fukushima for 3 years, then maybe you have a 52% chance of getting cancer. And then you think, oh, well, what's 2%? To somebody, that could sound like a lot. But to you, you're like, well, all right, that 50% chance of getting cancer, is that really dangerous to me? So there's no such thing as, but all radiation will give you an effect. If you're exposed to a lot of it at a little short of time or a little bit at a long period of time, there's a lot of studies about that. I encourage you to research radiation safety. But there is a lot, and having lived in Fukushima, how long are we on time?
We're right about a minute left.
Okay, having lived in Fukushima for the past 2 months, I was afraid to go there. I was afraid to go to Fukushima. But what I'm seeing now is the level of monitoring, the level of radiation, things like checks on all the food and everything. And for example, Fukushima is the only prefecture that does this. Miyagi, Ibaraki, Iwate is not measuring for radiation. So I think that in the end, the safest place you can get food from is going to have been Fukushima. Because if they detect radiation in the food, they're not going to serve it. But they're only serving what doesn't have any levels of radiation. So, also again, take your research. Maybe we can send links to the blog.
Yeah, we'll find it.
Yeah.
Okay, unfortunately, time is up. Again, Ari will be in C21 upstairs after school. So again, if you have the time and you want more opportunity to listen to him, to speak to him, then please come. We'll be there from 3:45 after school today. Okay. So a final thank you for today. Thank you very much.
They're gonna go change.